Clare Mackintosh. Well, I have had you on my wish list to come on this podcast since I started. So to have you here, it's a dream come true. Thank you so much for being on the next chapter.
It's a pleasure. It's lovely to know I'm on anyone's wish list. And it turns out all you had to do was ask, and I said yes. So I
I know.
don't need to stay on your wish list.
I will just explain to our very lovely listener that I met you very briefly at the book party. Now, we've interviewed Victoria, who organised it, and AJ on this podcast. And you were there. And as I said, I'd always wanted to have you on the podcast. And I was there with my husband. And I was like, there she is. And my husband was like, go and ask her. And I was like, oh my, I thought you were going to think I'm some kind of crazy lady. And you were so kind. And then when I messaged you, you said yes. So we do make these things very difficult for ourselves.
We do, yeah, yeah. Even things that seem insurmountable are actually often quite straightforward.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. But anyway, so welcome. So we start as ever with the prologue. Now, am I right in saying, Claire, that you were actually born in Bristol?
I was, but in that way that, everyone has to be born somewhere, don't they? I mean, I don't have any real affiliation with Bristol apart from the fact that I was born there, because by the time I was 4, we were out in Buckinghamshire.
Okay, which is where I grew up, and I now live in Bristol. So I did the other way around to you. So when you say the home counties, whereabouts in Buckinghamshire were you?
Oh, I grew up in a village called Hadnam, which most people know only for Hadnam and Tame Parkway, which was the railway station which opened when I was maybe about 8 or 9, amid much excitement. It's a small, well, it was a small village. It's now, because of the train station, it's one of those enormous villages that a lot of commuters live in. And I went to school in Aylesbury.
Ah, okay. I grew up in Burnham Beeches.
That's the posh end of Buckinghamshire.
I wouldn't say because I think Aylesbury's quite posh.
Is
No,
Aylesbury
I
posh?
think
It
so.
didn't it didn't feel very posh in the 90s. Maybe it's posh now.
Maybe it's got a deli now and it's got really posh. But yeah, and so you have two sisters. I think I'm right in saying, and your dad was an NHS consultant. And I read or heard that you went to a very academic school, but you weren't entirely. Your sister really wanted to be a teacher, but you didn't really know. You loved writing, but you didn't really know. But obviously, you had an affinity towards languages.
Yeah, I think it's hard for young people, isn't it? I was doing a talk to sixth formers last week in the Isle of Man, and I asked them to put their hands up if they knew what they wanted to be doing in 10 years' time. And only 3 out of about 40 put their hands up. And that's pretty consistent. I don't think we can expect people to know what they want to do, but it is good to give them a kind of a steer, to show them lots of different things they might do. And because the school I went to, it was a grammar school, a state school, a selective grammar, it was very, very good at putting people on the right path for medicine, law, veterinary science. I don't think then, I'm sure it's changed now, I don't think then it was particularly good at looking at opportunities in the arts. And I just didn't know that people worked in the arts, which I know sounds absurd, but every adult in my orbit had what I still think of as a proper job. They worked in offices, or they were doctors or receptionists, or in shops. They had jobs that they, went somewhere to do. I didn't know anyone who painted or danced or sang or wrote for a living.
Yeah, well, that's understandable. I'm not sure lots of people do, to be honest, Claire, even today. And we'll come on to talk about this, but writing, acting, dancing, they're all things, aren't they? That even today, if you say this is what I want to do, often it is met with a well, it's one of the, it's not. Whereas these other jobs do have such a career path as such and a structure, and so. So, as I understand it, that you first of all, you had a gap year in France. So you were going to do French and German. Then you went to France, and then you worked. Am I right in saying you worked at a hotel, but where some of the rooms were rented by the hour?
Where have you dug this up? This is like being on This Is Your Life.
Yeah. I'm going to get my red book out in a minute, Claire.
It was an education, my gap year. I went to Paris. I worked in this little hotel, and because I'd led a very sheltered existence, I was sort of a bit confused as to why people would pay for a room for a night but leave after an hour.
Well, yeah. I mean, they're having a
And then
nice lunch.
I was also slightly sort of confused as to why there were some guests, female guests, who lived in the hotel all the time.
Yeah.
And that in my defense for this very sort of sheltered viewpoint, I'd grown up on a diet of faulty towers where people did live in the hotel. You know, the major and the old ladies lived in the hotel. So although it was odd, I just didn't realize what was going on for a while. And then I did. And it was a tricky time in lots of ways. And some things happened that I would rather, hadn't happened, but which were all really character building. And what they really did was show me a side of life that I absolutely would not have got in my little bubble in middle class Buckinghamshire, and which served me in good stead in years to come.
It's funny. I feel like I don't want you to think I'm some kind of crazy stalker, because I feel like I'm mirroring. But I also had a year in France after my A levels. So you're like, who is this woman? But I think, and it's interesting because I have teenagers, but we were talking about this yesterday about having a gap year, and actually, not that I would ever tell them what to do. I still think for me, it changed the course of my life, because it just gave me, and it actually made me enjoy university a lot more. I don't know if you feel the same about that.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. So I was literally having this conversation with a friend about half an hour ago, because our sons are about to go off to Australia. And in my son's case, it is a traditional gap year between A levels and university. In her case, her son has been in the workplace and doesn't at the moment plan to go to university. But what we were talking about is it still creates this sort of punctuation mark between two. It's like a semicolon between two parts of a young life. And I think it's so helpful for broadening horizons and almost sort of testing the waters of the real world with the safety net of an end date, that you're going to come back and take stock before you go on to your next chapter.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And I think it's sort of very, even like you say, when you have things that you didn't particularly enjoy, it's those parts that give you that strength then in the next part. So you went to Royal Holloway University and you were going to do French and German, am I right? And then but because you spent so long doing French, you actually ended up doing French and business management.
I did. I panicked. I was actually, before I went to France, I was much better at German, but because I'd been in France for about 8 months, I was completely fluent, sort of all really bilingual by that point. And I hadn't touched German at all. And I went to the first lecture and I couldn't understand a word, was properly panicked because all I could think of was French. And it's another example of where the educators in my life could have, there have been several points where I think adults or people older than me could have pointed me in a better direction. And on that particular occasion, when I went to head of faculty or whoever it was to say I'm going to have to drop German or switch, I think all they had to say was, do you know what, your German's going to come back. Just give it a few weeks, go and listen to some, we didn't have podcasts then, but, go and watch some dodgy satellite television and read articles. Yeah, let's find some German people to speak to and it will all come back. Or they could have said, what do you love? And I would have said books and storytelling and writing. And they might have said, why are you not doing an English degree? At which point I would have said, I don't know, because that's absolutely what I love. Anyway, they didn't say that. They said, right, well, you've got a week to pick another subject. And I just panicked in the same way that if you're in a restaurant and the waiter is there and says, what do you want? We haven't got this available. What are you going to have now? And you just go, okay, I'll have the squid.
Yeah.
Um, so I chose the squid. I chose management studies, kind of business studies, on the basis that it felt like it might lead to a job.
Yeah.
Uh, I had no interest in business. I'd never done anything to do with it. It was an absolute wild card.
Mm. It's interesting though, because you say that, but and again, we'll come on to talk about this later. But in the writing world, I've heard you say how much you do enjoy the business side of it. So it's funny, isn't it? Because there must have been some. This is using my amateur psychology now, Claire, but there must have been something that drew you there, and you did it. But it was then, and you were still because you wrote. Did you write when you were in your gap year? You wrote a novel.
I did write a novel. Write a novel. I mean, I played with a novel. I started writing a novel called Baguettes and Brothels, which at the time I thought was going to be a kind of sort of, like George Orwell Down and Out in Paris and London. I thought I was writing sort of a kind of tongue-in-cheek literary novel about modern Paris. I wasn't, and it wasn't very good, but it did flex my creative writing muscles and also showed me how you can take control of a situation by writing about it and
Mm.
fictionalizing it and putting the spin on it that you want to put.
That's right. Yeah, it's true, isn't it? It gives you sort of some kind of a little bit of outlet where you can have some control, isn't it? Really, as well, and but also use your imagination. And so this was all going on. However, when you were coming up to graduating, you were a bit concerned about what you wanted to do, and you were due to go to, was it a management consultant talk? But you were a bit late.
I was always late. I am always late. I now know why I'm always late, but we'll maybe come on to that later. I yeah, I did panic about not knowing what to do, and I had enjoyed elements of my management degree. So as you say, there was something
Hmm.
there that attracted me to it, and I discovered that although I hated manufacturing, I mean, frankly, who can get excited by conveyor belts? I hated economics, finance, all that side of things. Loved public relations, adored marketing, loved the strategy of how you might grow a business. All of that I found really challenging and exciting, and has actually turned out to be one of the best things I could have done for my brain and for my career. So I thought, right, I'll be a management consultant. A lot of my business studies peers were heading in that direction. Went to the room, was late, rushed in. It was a lecture theatre, raked seating, lots of people sat there. I kind of, slid in at the back, full of apologies. And then when I looked up, realised that I was in the wrong room, and there was a police officer at the front of the room, and I was in a lecture on joining the graduate scheme for the police. Uh, and obviously, I should have left at that point and found the right room, but because I'm British and a bit awkward, and I'd made such a fuss, and the door had slammed as I'd come in, I thought, well, I can't leave now. I'm just going to stay. And so began a 12-year career in the police. So goodness knows what would have happened if it had been a talk on joining the circus.
Yeah, you'd have been juggling. You'd have been juggling, Claire. You'd be great at it,
Swinging
though.
from the trees.
You'd have been so good at it. But I mean that. But again, I love things like that because is a proper sliding doors moment, really, isn't it? That really is. And I think I heard you say as well. It made me laugh that you wondered were they all just so rich, these management consultants, that they needed some police there, security.
It took a while for the penny to drop. The thing is, though, I can trace back the thread of what I'm good at and what I enjoy, and even when it's not immediately obvious, it all actually makes sense. So all the stuff I did as a kid, all the acting, the singing, the dancing, the making funny stories to make my friends laugh, the writing, the books, it was all storytelling, and it was all different all the time. It was busy and buzzy, and it was a performance. A lot of what I liked about my business degree was the storytelling, the performance, the how are we going to tell the story of this business? What's our mission statement? What are our values? How are we going to market it so that people understand who we are and why they need us? What appealed to me about the police were two things. Firstly, the connection with people, the human stories, the way that you can make a difference to somebody's life narrative. And the other thing that really appealed was the idea of doing many, many jobs in one career. And it was the same thing actually that had made me think about becoming a management consultant, because I had a sort of fear really of just being trapped in one job. I'd spent another year in Paris as part of my degree, and I'd really, really loved it. I'd worked as a bilingual PA in a commercial property firm for a pension organization, and I had really loved it. But that sort of, so the French call it métro boulot dodo, which means commute, work, sleep. It's like the kind of it's the merry-go-round, the constant hamster wheel of this is how your working week goes. And it did fill me with a kind of existential dread that this was what adult life was like. And of course, as a management consultant, you parachute into different companies, you're always changing your environment. And the police offered the same sort of thing. And it's absolutely something that played to my strengths and kept me interested.
And I mean, it was fascinating. I mean, like you said, you were there for 12 years. And you said, am I right? This was when you were now in Chipping Norton. And you ended up being, was it inspector of operations? Is that for Thames Valley Police? And I mean, obviously, having grown up there, Thames Valley Police is huge. I mean, that was a really big job. But to get that job, there was 12 places out of 3,000 applicants. So you must have, obviously you shone through, but you were clearly very passionate and drawn towards it at this stage now.
Yeah, so the 12 out of however many thousand, that was when I joined. That was when I left that room at university. And I remember really, really vividly his sort of closing remark after he'd given this presentation, and he held up two forms, right? He had boxes on the table in front of him. And he said, this is the form. So I'm from the Home Office. This is the form for the graduate program, which is a Home Office fast track that is designed to create future leaders of the police force. We will be taking a handful of applicants this year. And so we advise you to take both application forms, take the standard one, and apply through both routes. And I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was the sort of competitive element or I honestly don't know, but I just only took the one form. I took the form fast track, and I applied, and I was utterly terrified by the selection process. And I remember I kept getting through there were several rounds, and the final round I was up, I can't remember where, miles and miles away from home, and we were the final few hundred applicants who were going to end up with this sort of handful of jobs on the fast track scheme. And I remember calling my dad and saying, I am way out of my depth. There are people here who are so clever and they're really political, and I don't know if I can do this group discussion. The whole thing was terrifying. And he said, just enjoy the experience. It doesn't matter. Just take what you can from it, and don't overthink it. Just be you. And I put the phone down, and the next thing I had to do was a general knowledge written exam. Now, general knowledge is a serious problem for me, and if any of you listening caught me on Celebrity Eggheads, you will understand that. And so I was genuinely terrified of this. Anyway, do you know what the first question was? The very first question, it gave me so much confidence, was which novel is this first line from? Last night I dreamt I went to Mandalay again. And it was like a sign. It was like a sign that everyone knows something. Everyone has a skill, something to offer, because I knew that in that room there would be loads of people who didn't know that book. And I did what my dad advised, and I didn't overthink it. Anyway, I was given one of those 12 places. And yeah, it started on this sort of fast track scheme. And then actually I ended up coming off that scheme because I rather perversely decided I didn't agree with it. I was finding it very difficult to be handed things without merit. So I'd obviously, they're selecting people they consider are going to be good leaders, but what they do is they put them into different departments. And I always felt like I was having to prove myself. And I just wanted to take the board interviews like everyone else and apply like everyone else. And so I came off the scheme and just carried on my own. And then yes, by the end of my career, I was actually operations inspector for Oxfordshire within the Thames Valley sort of operations department. So there was someone else for Berkshire and someone else for Buckinghamshire. And I became a public order commander, so a riot commander.
But that's huge. I mean, also, well done you for taking yourself off the scheme, because I'm not sure that many people do that. And did you? I mean, I know you've got a whole different career now, but just sort of going back, did you obviously always had very much, as you said, like an interest in people and the stories, and of all those different jobs that you had to do in the police, was it when you were with families? And I know that, and I've read you say about this, that it would be anyone who could be a victim of crime, who could be a witness, or even commit a crime. This is what happens, and you were always there. Was that one of the sides of it that, enjoy is not the right word, but was that the part that drew you the most, would you say, was the dealing with the people?
It was a desire to make lives better. And I was really very, very driven by the fact that I felt the way we approached policing in this country was fundamentally flawed in many ways. And I really wanted to be in a position to change that or contribute towards changing that. And really, you do that at a political level. And so that was what drove me to want to get promoted. The day-to-day job, the difference is made in different ways. And what's so amazing about being a police officer is that no matter how bad your day is, you've changed someone's life for the better. So that was the motivator. It wasn't until I was in the police that I learned what then drove me for the rest of my career, which is exactly as you say, that that fortune can put any of us in a situation where we will make choices that we might not necessarily think in a current position of comfort and safety that we would be capable of making. But bad people do good things and good people do bad things. And life really isn't as binary as a lot of people would like to believe.
And you would have seen. I mean, I don't obviously know. My husband is also a journalist, and he is a crime journalist. So he spends a lot, and the part of it that I know finds the most interesting is the work he does as a podcast, like with police, and because also in today, like, it's what you go above and beyond. It's all very well that people on the outside of the police will say, oh, we all have opinions of it, but the work and the hard work and the long hours, and also the grueling and the to be in these situations, which some people, touch wood, might never be in a lifetime, but you're seeing it every single day. It is I know it's very easy to say it in a sentence, but it is an incredible job, which I think we don't always really understand when you haven't worked in it.
Absolutely. And the toll that it takes on police officers' mental health is horrific. I remember seeing a statistic, I forget which year it was referring to, but in a 12-month period, more police officers had lost their life to suicide than in the line of duty. And that is a really horrifying fact that is not being properly addressed. The very first job I went to as a serving officer was the suicide of a colleague.
Oh.
Know that colleague until I searched his pockets and found a warrant card. And actually in that year, just in my small station, there were 3 officers who took their own lives. this is, this is a really horrific, catastrophic indictment of an organization that is constantly being berated for being flawed, but isn't supported in looking after its own staff enough.
Yeah. And also, so much of the good isn't reported. That's what we always see as journalists when you do meet that we don't report the good, do we? It's always what could have been, the ones that get, the things that have slipped through or whatever it is. That's what gets the highlights all the time.
Oh, absolutely. And I find it always very, very interesting to compare media coverage of our emergency services. So if you were to look for all that month's articles about the NHS workers, not the system, but NHS staff, you will find 90% positive stories about how great and hardworking and long-suffering our nurses and doctors are. Look at the fire service, you'll find even more. These are all heroes. And of course, they're all heroes. But then start looking at stories about individual police officers and come back and tell me how many good stories you've found. Because actually what you see is the corruption, which has to be dealt with and has to be transparent and made public. You see ridiculous stories and complaints on social media about a police officer who's seen having a sandwich, having the temerity to eat a sandwich, in a police car. And there is no understanding from the general public about how, police officers don't get meal breaks, or they don't get to go home at the end of their shift if there's something on. They are working horrific hours, far too much demand. They're constantly being sent to jobs that actually they shouldn't be dealing with, because is it a police officer's job to deal with the fact that your neighbour keeps parking in front of your driveway? And they are being battered from all ends.
And you worked, and am I right? You said because your husband was he was in the police as well. So did you meet him obviously through the police? So you're very much, this was your world. This was very much your world. And I know that I think you were looking at almost, you're doing 50, 60-hour weeks at least, looking at almost being a chief constable, or like this was, you were going to keep rising and quite rightly. But you also had a family, and then you realise, and this is where we start going into your next chapter, but you realised there was no way you would be able, and you didn't necessarily want to go down to a part-time role, that you were going to be able to sustain this. And I understand that, was it that you were assessed potentially for this chief constable role, and how they described you was this woman who very much was, had her door open, and it was a lovely, lovely report. But you realised that actually you weren't showing up at home in quite the way that you really wanted to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, I do have to clarify, as the chief inspector role, there are a lot of ranks between inspector and chief constable.
Well, look, it sounds good to me, Claire, whatever it is.
I just had, I think a lot of us are two people, more than two people. And in fact, it's probably only now in my late 40s that I am one person all the time, pretty much. But most of us will, at the very least, be one person at work and one at home. And I was much better at work than I was at home, in many, many ways, more available, more energetic, more enthusiastic, more balanced, emotionally calm. And that's not what I wanted. And this is now the third place at which a person in a position of responsibility could have done things differently. So when I went to the chief constable and said, I want to leave the police, she laughed and said, I give you 3 weeks at the school gate, you'll be begging to come back, which was not super helpful. She said, take a career break, take 2 years, and then come back. You'll want to come back, basically. And I knew I wasn't going to come back. And taking a career break didn't actually address the underlying reasons that I'd gone to her, which was that I was trying to have it all. And we talk a lot about, women being able to have it all. And I think you have to think quite carefully about whether you're having it all at the expense of either yourself or at the expense of something or someone that you hold very dear. And I don't think I was having it all. I think I was doing it all and not terribly well, or at least not some bits of it. Had the roles been reversed and someone came to me with that problem, I hope I would have maybe dug into it a bit more and tried to persuade me to go part-time. And I was very, very resistant to part-time because I really felt that I couldn't make that work. But honestly, I think they could have kept me in the police. Maybe they didn't want to. Maybe they were all kind of, applauding, hurrah, finally we've got a shot of her. But they could have kept me, and I would perhaps have had quite a lot to contribute in those senior ranks. But they didn't do that. And so I went on my career break, and obviously my, as it turned out, that gap year changed my life. I never went back to the police.
Just before we go on to that, two things. Why, when you said that you knew you wouldn't go back, even though it was a 2-year career break, what made you so sure that you wouldn't go back? And also, why were you personally at the time so anti part-time, you working part-time?
So the reason I felt I wouldn't go back is because I was stepping off. So my career had been very rapid. At every point, I was either taking a promotion exam or sitting a board or starting on a new department. And, it was constant movement, constant steps towards, the next rank, the next big thing. And I felt that as soon as I stepped off that treadmill and my peers would carry on, without me, they'd go past me, they'd take those roles, they would become the next bright young thing. I didn't see how it would be possible to come back. And again, this is not a new problem for women. And firstly, I do want to really sort of acknowledge the fact that we're talking now, this is 2013. We're talking a long time ago. Things have changed a lot, and there is so much more support for women on maternity leave, parental leave, and on career breaks and going part-time. But I looked at all the role models available to me at that time. I looked at the handful of senior female leaders in my police force, and I did not see anyone who was managing, who was still married, who had young children, who was seemingly able to balance life in the way that I felt was a sort of healthy and sustainable way. There wasn't a single one. Now, there must have been them, and they would have been them in other forces, and there must have been a way of, we had the women's network then, but it wasn't perhaps as sort of helpful as it is now. That there would have been those role models either within that organization or in another industry, some kind of mentoring process that might have helped me see this is just a blip, because it's all it is. They say with parenting that the days are long and the years are short, and that is absolutely how it is. And I was caught in that moment where the days felt so long, it felt so impossible that I could get through this period, bearing in mind I had 3 children within 15 months. And so it, and I'd been through a lot. One of my sons had died, so my first set of twins were very unwell, and Alex died when he was 5 weeks old. So I'd been through these 2 years of incredible extreme emotions, and it wasn't really an ideal time to be making these sorts of enormous decisions about my career. It was impetuous, and something I know now that I didn't know then is that I have ADHD. And as anyone who knows anything about ADHD knows, spontaneity, impulsivity, that dopamine hit, not thinking things through is all part and parcel of what can make us very brilliant, but can also trip us up. And I was am very prone to making these slightly hot-headed, massive decisions. And sometimes they work really well. Like, oh, I'll join the police. Great decision. Leaving the police, maybe not such a great impulsive decision.
Just this morning, finished listening to the book that you wrote. I promise this won't always hurt like this. And again, I thank you for writing a book like that, such a personal book about losing Alex and the impact it's had on you. But also, when you go back to what your dad said those lovely things, just be you, which I just think is the kindest thing anyone could ever, and the most supportive thing anyone could ever say to somebody. It's what I try and do here on the next chapter, is to show the importance, because when we are that, you just be you is easier said than done, but actually you can't go too far from them. I mean, can't go too far wrong from that point, but at that moment in time, you did actually, it felt right, and you acted on it. And actually, look at what you've gone on to do, Claire, because I mean, holy macaroni, when I was reading about it, and I was like, oh my God, and so it was a real risk. And I don't know if you would like to go back to the police. I don't know, but I mean, what you were then, so what you were doing is you started writing, which I think again is incredibly brave, because going back to what we're saying, there weren't the role models who had big writing careers. And also, I know it's so hard with writing and then you've got young children, you've got those babies, you're writing, but you managed to build it by writing. You'd been writing a blog, I think, on your maternity leave, and you got more copywriting, but you were doing everything. And that would have taken, around those babies and everything that you've been through, that would have taken a lot of work, I would imagine, at that time. And also some self-belief in there that you could actually earn, and you ended up getting your earnings up to the same as what you had at the police, which I'm in awe that you could do that.
Wow, police need to be paid more, don't they?
Yeah.
So I just approached this like a project. I mean, one of the good things about this impetuous decision to leave the police is that I had to earn money. Whereas perhaps if I'd sort of stayed in the police and thought, well, I'm going to try and build a writing career or write a novel, it would have been much harder. But there is nothing like having to pay the mortgage to, drive your motivation to succeed. And I remember immediately after I'd handed my notice in, and I went, I had an evening with the NCT girls, so the baby group women, and I told them what I'd done, and they said, "Oh wow, big decision. What are you going to do for a job?" And I said, "I'm going to be a writer. I love writing my blog. I think." That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a writer. And I remember so vividly the patronizing expression on one of their faces. And she was a good friend. She just kind of tilted her head and went, "Oh, maybe it's better keeping that sort of thing as a hobby, And I thought, if I had said to you, I am going to go off and be a teacher, you would have all congratulated me and felt that was perfectly logical and, an achievable thing, because there's a clear path to follow. Well, why can't there be a path to follow to be a writer? And so I created my own path. I sat down and I thought about where money would come from and what writing I could easily do. I was not a trained journalist. I wasn't a journalist. And so I wasn't going to put myself up against proper journalists, but I could write, and I knew that. And so I had one paid gig at that time. I wrote a column for Cotswold Life magazine, and I was paid £50 per column for it. And I wrote that for just over 10 years. But it formed the basis of my writing career, because I said to myself, if one editor wants to pay me for my writing, it is logical that there will be others. And that, honestly, that was my self-belief. That's where it came from. And I never doubted my ability to do it, because he was already paying me to write, albeit a pittance. And so I did some courses. I have a bit of a habit of, if I can't find the course that is absolutely tailored to what I want, I'm not really good at wasting time on a course that only gives me 10% that's useful. I don't want to sit there all day listening to something that's not relevant or I already know. So I started putting together bespoke training. I went to people who had the skills that I needed. So pitching, for example, I didn't know how to pitch to an editor. So I found people who did, and I said, this is the knowledge I want. How much will it cost me to get it? And I formed lots of relationships like that. And that came sometimes with contacts, or if it was training that was going to be too expensive, then I would say, great, how many people can you deliver this to? And then I would get other people that wanted those skills as well, and do it that way. So I skilled myself up. In the same way that if you're in a job, you have continuous professional development. I just treated it like a job, and pitched and pitched and pitched. But I also I did a lot of copywriting for businesses because that is easier to get and pays better. And I started doing social media content. And then there was a kind of like a Venn diagram of skills that suddenly came together that I didn't know I had, or didn't know were connected. And so it was sort of the PR and marketing that I'd loved at university, and it was the storytelling of performance and acting and theatre, and it was the writing, and all of this. I suddenly realized that I could write social media content in a way that spoke to people, resonated, just kind of really worked. And that I had the strategy that I didn't know I had, from perhaps sort of triggered by my business degree, to see how that could link into a business's aims. So I started writing social media for businesses, but more importantly, financially, I started developing social media strategies for small businesses. And from that, and from my blog, I was headhunted by Philips, the electronics firm, and I went out to Amsterdam and interviewed for this job. There was one other UK blogger who was also interviewed, and I got the job, and I became the online face of their domestic appliance range, which is the least sexiest job you can think of.
That's brilliant.
But do you know what? For 3 years, it covered bills. It gave us kitchen appliances. It wasn't sexy, but it was amazing in terms of having a young family and needing to put food on the table and have a steady income. So that was a big bit of my portfolio writing career, and then around it were lots of other freelance bits and pieces that I pitched and honed and worked on all the time.
But that really is incredible, Claire, to bring all of that together. Also, obviously you've got this real curiosity to learn, which is so important. But also, what you didn't realise as well, which I still can't believe you did all that with young children and babies. But what you were also going back to when you were a girl, and you did love your writing and your stories and that. You then looked to writing your own novel. But all this that you were doing then, because I followed you for a long time now with social media, and you do it extremely well, which I know lots of authors, including myself, even though I work in TV journalism, I find it very hard. But all of this was building a foundation for the next thing. So you did write a debut novel as well, and you were able to pitch it and whatever, and then you had your agent, and it was one editor that picked it up. But what is incredible in that book, I Let You Go, that was a debut. And I heard you say about, sorry, I'm talking over you, because it's only that I've been fascinated listening to all these different stories. But you just said, what should I be looking for, this kind of success? And it's like, what should a debut novelist be looking at? It actually ended up being picked up by Richard and Judy for the book club, which is huge. But you were almost, whereas I know that sometimes they say for a debut novelist that can be quite a big thing, it can almost be the wrong way round. You want it to slow build, but you had built this foundation, so you were almost ready for it.
I don't know about ready for it. It was terrifying and a huge surprise, and the most incredible thing that has ever happened to me professionally. It was extraordinary. I certainly embraced it and ran with it, but Yeah, I guess I was sort of, my author infrastructure was perhaps more in place than someone else's might have been, but I don't know how much difference that makes really. I believe very strongly in taking control of your life and your situation, and writing your own narrative. There is, especially in publishing, there's a very odd power imbalance, and it starts with the desire to find an agent, because it's really hard to find an agent. And so immediately the author, who, lest we forget, is the one who has created a potentially brilliant product, the author starts from a position of weakness. And then, as and when they eventually do get an agent, they're so grateful, so happy that their position's weakened even further. And then, getting an editor, you're eventually, by the time your book gets to the shelves, I hear authors all the time being so happy and grateful that they've got what they wanted, that they lose sight of the fact that they created that brilliant thing that is now on the shelves. And I think it's useful to approach your business, because that's what it is, like you're the CEO, and you can drive the strategy and you can shape how people respond to it. And of course, there are things out of our control. Once you hand that book over to a publisher, they might do a good job, they might do a bad job with it. And you have to be realistic about what you can do as an individual. But I do think there's a lot we can do. And if nothing else, it really helps my mindset to know that I have done absolutely everything I can do to present the best possible version of myself, of my book, of my business.
I've never heard it. Thank you for saying it like that, because that is absolutely true. And I've never heard it said like that. And I say that as somebody who tried for 10 years to get an agent and never did. And I have a publisher now, and I self-publish, and I love it. And I still love the idea with self-publishing. I do, for all the reasons you say, as in having ownership. But I'm working with publishing, and I still don't know very much about the publishing industry, so I can learn from these brilliant people. But I'm still very much in that new. But you're right, because it's that you end up almost feeling grateful, and it's you end up with this like a weakness. I remember, sorry to talk about myself here, but I just remember very vividly going to the London Book Fair, and I got lost, and I ended up on the floor where all the agents were, and it was one of the most awful experiences of my life, because I could see all these people that I knew them, I know who they are, and they all rejected me, and it was like I was standing there, and there was a party, and I was just never going to ever be invited to this party, and it was just. And I was like in my 40s and felt terrible. It's awful, but it's how it's kind of. But the industry is changing, but isn't it incredible all that you weren't sure, like with the business management and all that, but actually it took you so that you had this power that you didn't even know that you necessarily had, that you would need in a literary world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard, it's impossible to know, isn't it, much how much that path sort of was leading to this, and how much is just sort of, now that I'm here, these are the skills that I draw on from my past. We can't really chart that, but it absolutely, that there are, I just think I use everything. I use all those skills and hobbies that I've had over the years. There's this common thread of story, and that story is sometimes a story of strategy, and sometimes of marketing, and sometimes of a twisty thriller that I'm writing, but it is always story.
And also, we should say, of all those years when you were in the police and you were with people and real life, and I'm not saying you were doing that, you didn't know then you would be an author one day, but presumably you remember the moments, and and because you've always been fascinated and very interested in people, that's part of it, that you can, what you were saying earlier, that fiction does give you, you can sort of make sense of certain things, I would imagine, of some of the things that you saw or tried to, but you equally know how somebody truly does react in some of these situations.
Yeah, absolutely. It gave me an exposure to so many different people's worlds, and absolutely feeds into my novel writing now. You know, life gives us lots of material, lots of answers, but it also throws up lots of questions that as writers are rich territory to explore, whether that's in articles or non-fiction or in novels.
And I know, like you touched on it, but you say in a lot of your books, there, although you write crime and thrillers, but there's a lot of grief, and which comes on the other side of love, and you wouldn't necessarily think of it quite like that, but you absolutely do. So it's a way of exploring all of this and you can still be at home as well, which is just incredible. And I mean, also incredible because you didn't just get one Richard and Judy book club. I think you got three, was it in total? So now you've sold like 3 million books. I mean, it's incredible, Claire. It really is. Do you still enjoy the writing? Do you still enjoy it as much as you did as when you started?
I do. I'm hesitating because there are times when I don't. Whereas in the when I wrote I Let You Go, there weren't ever times where I didn't love writing. I was desperate to get back to my novel, and the reason there are times now that it's sort of less enjoyable is because there are lots of other pressures that come with it. I'm feeling an enormous pressure right now to write a particularly brilliant book, and I'm battling an innate fear that I'm not going to be able to. And I know why that is. It's the same reason I struggled to write I See You, which is the book that came after I Let You Go. It's because I have recently written a book I think is my best book. It's not out until next spring, so we'll maybe the proof of the pudding will be in the eating of it. But because I'm so excited about it and proud of it, I now feel frozen. And so sitting down to write is, I've got this little voice on my shoulder telling me that it's not going to be as good as It's Not What You Think. But I've done this before. I can overcome that. So yes, I love writing. It's an enormous honor to be paid to make things up. And it's just incredible to still be here more than 10 years on, still making a living, still supporting my family, still getting messages from readers about all my books. Everyone has a different favorite book, which is lovely. It's just an extraordinary, I feel I've had the most extraordinary life, and I'm not yet 50, so I am very excited for my next chapter.
Yeah, which leads us very nicely. See, look, you've done this before, Claire, to be continued. Before we do that, though, what do you do? Do you just make yourself sit down and write? Do you just get through it when you're feeling like this? Do you write every day?
No, do I try to? No, I don't write every day. There's a lot of my job that doesn't involve writing, and so like everyone, my inbox is always full. Today this morning I started my newsletter. I'm going to finish that this afternoon. I did some sort of feedback editing on some pages for a friend. We're doing a skills swap. I'm helping with her book. She's helping me with something else, and lots of emails. I looked at some marketing stuff. So I probably won't write today. Yesterday on the Isle of Man, I went to a cafe and I thought I want to write 1,000 words. And as I had that thought, I opened my emails and I started looking at emails because hello, ADHD. And I thought, no, you've got to do this. You've got to, get into the flow. And so I messaged a friend who was online and I said, I'm just checking in with some accountability. I'm going on to Do Not Disturb now, and I'm coming back to you when I've written 1,000 words. And knowing that they would be looking at the time when I came back, and knowing that I would feel slightly judged if those 1,000 words took, 4 hours, I was able to just write. And it took, I would say, about 15 minutes for the compulsion to open another window to stop. And during those 15 minutes, it was almost painful to stop myself looking at emails, WhatsApp, etc. And then that went. And it is so, so similar. If any of you listening are runners, it's so similar to when you start off on a run and your legs feel so heavy and you just want to stop and, walk for a bit. It's such hard work. And you think this can't possibly get any easier. And then miraculously, you warm up and you get into your rhythm, and then it becomes, dare I say it, almost enjoyable. And so then I wrote my 1,000 words, and of course, as often happens, I didn't want to stop. And it was a really lovely writing session.
That's such good advice. It really is. It really is. So what is your to be continued, Claire? What would you like to do next? Dare I ask?
Fundamentally, I just want to be allowed to carry on doing what I'm doing. So if in 10 years' time, I am still writing a book every year or most years, and I'm still able to cover the bills doing that, I will consider myself incredibly lucky. That's not to say I don't want to do more things, though. So I want to I want to learn how to focus. That is my overriding goal right now. So the ADHD diagnosis is, whilst not a surprise to me or possibly to anyone who's ever lived or worked with me, a very new thing. And in fact, you're the first. This is the first time I've said it, out loud.
Oh, thank you.
Out family, and so I'm on medication, which is potentially life-changing. And I'm starting to get some sort of control back. I want to learn how to relax. I want to learn how to switch off. I want to learn how to say no. I want to recognize that just because I think I can do something or I see an opportunity to do something, it doesn't mean I have to do it. So all those are sort of, personal things that have an impact on my professional life. Because if I can nail all of that, then I think I'll just really enjoy life even more. But also I can possibly squeeze in a couple of other projects that I really want to do. Other genres I'd like to write in. I'd like to write scripts. Things, more storytelling in different ways.
Is that why you would say, what you said earlier, that you're often late? Do you think that's part of it?
Yeah, I don't want to be late because I hate upsetting people. I'm a real people pleaser. But I find it very difficult to judge how long things will take. How long it will take to walk somewhere, how long. So if I'm meeting you at 10 o'clock and the cafe is 5 minutes away, then at about 5 to 10, I will think, right, I just need to hang the laundry up and unload the dishwasher, and I'll do that before I go. And if I really thought about it, I would know that it takes longer than 5 minutes to do those things and also walk down the street to the cafe. But my brain just doesn't seem to acknowledge that. And so I generally, if I often leave at the time I should be there. So I think that's why. It's we're all work in progress, aren't we?
I read something like I'm often 5 minutes late or 10 minutes late, and I was reading somewhere about it the other day. And the other thing is a cognitive bias that we are. If you're optimistic, you just think it doesn't necessarily need to take that long. So it's like a wishful thinking, but it's not. And my husband and my sons always end up really cross with me, and I think I've just got to get a grip on this. But anyway, it's not about me, Claire. It's not about me. So for your acknowledgements, by the way, on your to be continued, just to finish off, I heard you talking about potentially you like the idea of self-publishing. Now, I think you'd be an amazing self-publishing person because you've got it all there.
I tell you why I'm frightened of self-publishing. So I am in awe of independent authors. I think they are amazing. And I am very aware that potentially I've got a lot of the skill set that would enable me to do this well. But because I'm so all or nothing, I think I find it so hard to put boundaries around my work anyway. I switch off so rarely, and at least now I have the luxury of being able to let my marketing team do something, the distribution. If I was doing everything, I think I'd make myself really quite ill by far too much, and just never ever stopping.
Yeah, I can understand that. But and also what you're doing now, it's working very well, so it makes complete sense. So for your acknowledgements, who are the people you'd like to thank who have helped you along the way?
So my family have been amazing. It's sort of ironic that I left the police because fundamentally my work-life balance was all out of kilter, because I can't really say that improved a lot once I Let You Go took off. I travel a lot. I'm often out of the country or away from home. And the children have been so resilient and coped really well with that, and understood that the reason they get to do some of the nice things they do is because my job is, a bit mad and takes me away. When I told my husband that I was going to leave work, and I didn't really know how I was going to earn the money that we would need, but I would make it work, he just trusted me and supported me 100%. And that has just never faltered, which has been incredible. And, not everyone can say that about a relationship. So that's been amazing. The author community is extraordinary. I think there might be maybe a perception, if you didn't know anything about publishing or authors, that we would all be desperate to see each other fail, desperately jealous. And don't get me wrong, there is, of course, there's a bit of green-eyed monster, and sometimes if I'm feeling a little bit low about where I'm at, or the writing's not going well, I absolutely cannot go on social media or open the bookseller and read about another squillion figure advance, because it's just too depressing. But authors in the main are so supportive. They lift each other up. They recommend each other's books to their readers. It is such a nice community to be part of. And so I couldn't do this without that community of people around our virtual water cooler.
How lovely. What a lovely thing, though, isn't it? You write these beautiful books and then all support each other like that. It's incredible. And so, when you were talking earlier, Claire, about like being a CEO, and absolutely, you've kind of done it with everything really. When you were in the police, you took charge of that, you took yourself off that scheme. And now as an author, you're not sort of waiting on necessarily on other people, you are taking charge. Now, if someone's listening to this and think, I like the sound of that, but do you know what? Whatever I am doing in my life at the moment, I'm not just necessarily even talking about career, but just have got this feeling that, do you know what? I know I'm capable of more than this. I absolutely know I am, and I'm on a path, and I'm just feel very stuck. But I have got no idea how to even become the CEO of my own life and to actually do what is sort of more meant for me. What would you say to that person as just a starting step of where you think they should start?
I think it's really useful to do a sort of deep dive into your own skills. A lot of us have not written a CV in a very, very long time, and it's not relevant right now. You're not necessarily applying for a job. But writing a kind of CV, pulling out those transferable skills that you've got and the qualities that you've got, is really useful, not just to see how they might fit into the path that you want to take, but also in reminding yourself of how brilliant you are. And I think this about women in particular, because women are so incredible. They're so strong. There's a really sort of cheesy meme that you see every now and again that says that women are like tea bags, because you only know how strong they are when you put them in hot water. And I really love it, because that's when we come into our own, is when times get a bit tough. We are so much braver and bolder than we think we are. And I really believe that anything we want to do, we can achieve. And so in those tricky situations, whether it's a career change, whether it's a relationship that you really don't want to be in anymore and you just can't see a way out, that there always is a way. There's always a first step you can take. I think it's about writing your own action plan, which I know is sort of a bit corporate, but every big goal starts with small steps. And even if you just take one of those steps, then you're still further down that path than you were before you took that first one.
Yeah, that's such good advice. And then very small we're very bad at celebrating ourselves, aren't we? That's the thing. But you don't quite realize what you have achieved, but you've achieved so much. So thank you. And just very, very finally then. So my goal, Claire, one day is to write the kind of books where when you're on holiday, you can't put it down, you read it in a day, and then you tell your friends or whoever, your partner, about it at night. Those amazing books. What would be the book that you would recommend that did that to you?
Oh gosh. Okay. First of all, Ellie, that's what we all want to write, is a book
Well,
like
you
that.
do, Claire. I've just been on holiday and I saw people around the pool reading your books like that. So you've done it. You've done it. That's why I was scared to come up to you.
So look, there are so many books that make me feel like that I'm not going to try and pull out my kind of favorite book. I'm going to tell you about one book I've read recently that absolutely gave me that feeling and made me rush up to people and say, make sure you pre-order this book. It came out just a week or so ago. It's called 59 Minutes by Holly Seddon. And it's about an emergency alert text that lands on everyone's phone in the UK to tell them that in just under an hour, there's going to be a nuclear attack that will wipe out the whole country. What do you do? Where do you go? Who do you want to be with? How is this going to play out over the next 59 minutes? It's incredible.
Wow. In fact, because Holly is one of the honest authors, isn't she? And I listen to them. So maybe I'd one day try and get her to come on the podcast too. But that is a brilliant recommendation. Claire, I'm so pleased that my husband told me to just ask you and come up to you. It was lovely to meet you then. It's lovely to meet you now. Thank you so much for all your wonderful work and for being such a wonderful guest on The Next Chapter.